treat depression without how can we develop?
I'm personally excited about this because it offers a more effective non-pharmaceutical approach to treating something that affects millions of people.
When people with major depression, it is a circuitopathy or a networkopathy. Those are terms that you hear a lot.
Which in our industry of depression, it's like science fiction. And just to kind of...
After 17 months of continuous therapy, he has an 83% improvement in his depressive symptoms.
To see them come to life, come back into remission is just a really inspiring thing, and ultimately what
you can't replace part of the brain.
Like, you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the MedTech industry.
Who exists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
#1 show in the MedTech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company. They had help apply a lot of things.
The State of MedTech with your host, Omar M. Khatib.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Long time coming. I have this problem where if I have a good friend, I sometimes assume that they've already been to the show, and then I realize they haven't. So Meron Gibertz and I met a couple years ago, through a mutual friend. I did a little work for them. And then a couple of months ago, I was talking to him, and I said, hey, I just realized you haven't been on the show, so we got to change that. So I'm really happy to have Meron Gibertz, who's the co-founder of Intercosmos, along with his co-founder, Dr. Darin Dougherty, who's a CMO. Really exciting company, mainly because, one, yes, it's a BCI company. More specifically, it's a psychiatric BCI company that's focused on a minimally invasive approach of using a digital pill. They're the first company that I heard using this concept of a digital pill. That's how they got my attention a few years ago. Designed to treat depression and some other cognitive disorders of the brain. We'll get into that in a moment. I'm personally excited about this because it offers a more effective non-pharmaceutical approach to treating something that affects millions of people, probably hundreds of millions of people around the world. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing?
Excellent. Great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's going to be a blast. I love having more than one person on the show. It's going to be fun. So maybe before we dive into the clinical aspects, the technology, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Dr. Dougherty, why don't you start first, and then we'll go to Meron. Just kind of give a quick background on yourselves.
Yeah, sure. And again, thanks for having us. So my name is Darin Dougherty. I'm a psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital and a professor at Harvard Medical School. At Massachusetts General Hospital, I direct the Division of Neurotherapeutics within the Department of Psychiatry. And the Division of Neurotherapeutics encompasses all surgical and or device-related treatments for psychiatric illness. So it includes old standbys that have been around like a century, like electroconvulsive therapy or ECT. We also do transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, vagus nerve stimulation, ketamine, deep brain stimulation. So all types of device and surgical treatments. And I founded that division 20 years ago and have been involved in the space since. That's part of the reason I'm so excited about Intercosmos. I've worked with a number of different devices, and I think we have found the sweet spot here, which we'll talk about later.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Dr. Dougherty. Dr. Dougherty sometimes is modest a bit about his experience with devices for depression in particular. So I'll supplement. I believe, Darin, you implanted the largest cohort of human patients with depression with devices out there, correct? I mean, is there anyone who has surpassed your
probably the highest for all indications, not limited to depression. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Well,
Yeah, just to kind of set the scene in terms of who we have on the call here, and super grateful and humbled to have your partnership. And Omar, thanks very much for having us. Super excited to share with you this brain-computer interface opportunity. To answer your question, I started off in the Israeli Special Technology Unit of the Intelligence Corps about 20 years ago. So I've been in deep tech for 2 decades. And I then went to Columbia and became a neuroscientist and computer scientist. And after that, I founded a company called Meta, which was the first commercially available augmented reality glasses. So still in the realm of deep technology, not yet MedTech. Um, but we did create sort of the Iron Man-like experience where, and there were medical use cases where, for example, you could see a TED Talk where I held a MRI of a brain, a volumetric 3D MRI of a brain, and we did the first Zoom session and his 3D Zoom session on main stage TED in history. My co-founder teleported in, and I passed him this 3D MRI of a brain, and that kickstarted that industry essentially. It was early still in the 2013 or so when we began, and augmented reality still is early for Facebook and turned into Meta and Apple. But our device certainly inspired the Meta Ray-Ban product that you see around and the Apple Vision Pro. So that was the beginning of that exciting industry. And about a few years ago, I came back to my hometown of neuroscience, and I partnered up with Dr. Dougherty, Dr. Eric Luthart from WashU, who's one of the leading advanced neurosurgeons in the country. He pioneered laser neurosurgery and for treating glioblastoma. He pioneered electrocorticography, modern ECOG for treating epilepsy. It's a sort of a neural device that goes under the bone, but above the dura mater protective sheath around the brain. So Eric is an amazing person and another one of our co-founders, and a number of others came together. I mean, we have Ed Boyden from MIT, one of the more well-known neuroscientists out there. Dr. Susan Alpert, who is the head of the FDA for device approvals, PMA device approvals in the 90s, head of regulatory at Medtronic, and now our head of regulatory. We came, all of us together, and we sort of asked ourselves this question: how can we treat depression without drugs, essentially? How can we develop a new product, a new device that is not much larger than a pill, but not swallowed, placed minimally invasively? And I say that word very, very carefully. That's not in the brain. It's not even under the skull. It's on top of the bone, on top of the head. And we'll go into more detail what that looks like. But what we came up with from the decades of experience of Dr. Dougherty and all those various people I mentioned is what we think the optimal solution for treatment-resistant depression, which is sort of the problem here. This is the third more severe patient population within the world of depression. To set the scene now on the problem, we're talking about the largest chronic disease disorder on the planet, basically. 21 million folks here in the United States, and 7 million of them don't react to 2 courses of antidepressants and are classified as the third most severe part of that market, called treatment-resistant depression. And I'll keep referring to them from here on out as TRD. And these folks really are, Darin's going to talk about some case studies in a few minutes, but we're talking about people who have been often in the basement for decades, not even interacting with their family, not able to interact with their family. It's a very, very dark and severe disorder. World Health Organization considers it the most debilitating disease. And so we really want to help this target patient population, because there's really no scalable solutions to address these 7 million people here in the US. There's one that came close to becoming scalable, which is called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS.
Yeah, that was a really big hit with psychiatrists because it was the first, I think, at least in my opinion, actual procedure that it can administer, or an actual intervention that's non-pharmaceutical.
Yes. And go ahead.
Can I take a wild guess as to, I think TMS is great, but there's one problem, is that with TMS, I believe that, one of the things we talk about with patients is like, efficacy and compliance. And so if you have somebody who has a lot of issues, they're very depressed, if they don't have a loved one to drive them to the clinic to get TMS done, doesn't make a difference, right? Is that the main issue with TMS?
Exactly.
Because I remember when I first saw it, I was like, this is amazing. But then I was like, oh, these are patients who have a psychiatric illness, right? And so that
Right.
makes sense. Dr.
The
Doherty,
most severe. So I'll pass it to Darin, who can even
and
kind of double click on what you said. Go ahead.
yeah, and I was going to ask Dr. Doherty, if you don't mind, I'm going to take it a little bit of a different direction or similar, same direction. But
Yeah, please.
something I wanted to ask you about is like in our research, we kind of noticed that conditions like depression are described as network opathies, where specific brain networks such as the default mode network and cognitive control network are essentially out of bounds. Could you kind of explain this concept like a little bit further and elaborate why precisely targeting and rebalancing these networks is key to treating things like depression?
Yeah, that's a great segue because that's exactly what we're targeting with this device. So in people with major depression, it is a circuitopathy or a networkopathy. Those are terms that you hear a lot. What you see is hyperactivity in the default mode network in people with depression, which means a lot of internal focus. And for them, it's not great. It's not good internal focus. It's ruminations, guilt, negative thoughts, those types of things. So that's an overdrive. And usually we use the cognitive control network as kind of a top-down balancer of what's going on underneath. And it is weakened in people with depression. So what you're really trying to do is drive some cognitive control in order to drive cognitive flexibility so they can move from state to state. Really, depression is a disease of reduced homeostasis. There's just not a lot of room outside of the kind of low energy state that you're in. And so, yeah, the whole idea is to be able to target that network, drive up the cognitive control, and in doing so, suppress the default mode network and see improvements. And that's what TMS does. And also what a lot of other treatments, you do pre-post imaging studies, you see that exact phenomena. So we're hoping to achieve that in a scalable fashion, just so more people have access to it.
That makes sense. One thing that I wanted to ask about is, why? Because when you hear BCI, you're thinking about something that's actually directly implanted into the brain. So why did you decide to go with not having that invasive approach?
Well, I could take this. Essentially, our co-founder, as I mentioned, Dr. Eric Luthart, a neurosurgeon, parenthetically, he, I believe, pioneered the term networkopathies. I think that's his term. You could double check that. And so these imbalances of brain networks. And Eric created this technology called electrocorticography, or modernized it as a brain-computer interface, as a closed-loop BCI, and to be able to control a prosthetic. And he's on a early paper in around 2004, and so they've been implanting stuff under the skull, above the dura mater, for BCI control. And they've been doing longitudinal studies in monkeys and in humans, and they discovered that when you put stuff under the bone, there's unexpected bone growth and all sorts of immune rejection type things that mean that it's going to be better to place it above the bone. Because when you're in bone, or we call it intracalvarial, and not under the bone, which would be called epidural, you avoid interacting with the brain's immune system. You could have something like a bone infection, but that is a very minor issue as compared to a hemorrhage, or all the types of infections that can occur under the skull. So the aha moment for us was, let's see if we can maintain the resolution within bone as if it were under the bone, and then take away what's called catastrophic neurosurgical risk. So this is, again, a paper that Eric Luthart wrote in 2021. And he kind of broke down really a lot of people are using this term minimally invasive, but he wanted to disambiguate that term. Companies like Neuralink are using it to describe a full craniotomy and cutting the dura mater and putting electrodes deeper in the brain. There's companies all around that are using this term, almost everyone in this field. But Eric wanted to disambiguate and really make it grounded in neurosurgical risk neurosurgical risk categories. And what he kind of demonstrated in this paper is that staying above the inner table of the skull doesn't have this neurosurgical risk, and catastrophic neurosurgical risk, and below does. So the big discovery that, go ahead. Yeah.
And I was going to say the other thing, just thinking from an anatomy standpoint, like the target area for stimulation that you guys are looking at is the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And because it's in the cortex, you don't have to actually go and have an invasive approach. Is that correct? Is that part of the reason why?
Yes, exactly. It's a surface cortical target. And one of the things that's really cool about neuromodulation and networkopathies is that you're not targeting, unlike, for example, motor control, where you're trying to get to one or a few neurons or up to a few thousand neurons with one electrode. That's high resolution on the one hand, but on the other hand, it requires more invasive placement of the electrodes. In the case of when you're modulating entire brain networks, you're really interacting with hundreds of thousands of neurons at a time, if not, million plus. And so what that means is that your electrode placement can be less invasive. And so that fact that I just described, this risk resolution balance, created a really huge opportunity for a series of technologies, actually dating all the way back to 80 years ago when electric shock therapy came about. It was about resetting brain networks. We didn't have the full neuroscience 80 years ago to understand it, but now we do, or we understand a lot more. 40 years ago, a more focal, so instead of ECT hits the entire front of the brain and it's inducing a seizure, and kind of almost like you're doing a long, hard press on your computer to reset it. It's resetting the brain networks by metaphor. 40 years ago, TMS comes along and says, hey, let's not hit the whole front of the brain. Let's just hit 1 centimeter, 10 millimeters, roughly focal diameter, in a place called left DLPFC, which is a central node of the network Darin described called cognitive control network. Cognitive control helps you focus outwardly and be processing external stimuli, and also controlling your internal, the activation of the default mode network and rumination and so forth. So when you have a healthy cognitive control, you're able to better be focused, be present. And so TMS, the science of TMS really became very exciting about 20 years ago when it got FDA approved for depression, 2008. And now there have been more and more refinements of this technique, until more recently TMS has a 79% efficacy and 90+% response rates, which in our industry of depression is almost unheard of. It's like science fiction. And just to kind of set the scene, within severe depression, you have this category called TRD, which is defined as having failed 2 courses of antidepressants. At that point, you have a 17% efficacy for drugs, 17. Compare that within that severe population pool with 79, and you get a 465% better effect with TMS than drugs. And I mean, that's just like a staggering number to just dwell on. It's almost double even electric shock therapy, which was previously the most effective in this space. It's roughly double psychedelics. You've heard of the use of psilocybin and all sorts of other type approaches. TMS is becoming really a gold standard. TMS is really got almost, you know, optimal scores. The challenge with TMS, as you mentioned, is simply that you have to keep coming back to the clinic, which is really a challenge for compliance. The original FDA protocol is 20 to 30 visits to the clinic in succession. Just imagine, for one of the least motivated patient populations on the planet, as you noted, to come back to the clinic so frequently is just impossible. And just imagine yourself as a healthy person having to go back to the doctor more than 3 or 4 times in a row. It's really days in a row. So then Stanford came up with a more modern technique about a few years ago called the same protocol, which is attempting to make it 5 days. But instead of coming in to the clinic for just an hour, you actually have to come in for 10 hours. You have to have 10 stimulations, shorter stimulations, with a frequency called theta burst. And within a week, roughly, you get this very high efficacy. But even coming back a week and being there all day is a really tough ask for a lot of patients, especially because 50% or more of patients will need retreatment. They'll need to repeat that week or that month, as it were, every few months. So it compounds this compliance risk, and it makes it really, really tough on patients. And so all we said, just to kind of bring it back to the digital pill, we said, okay, let's create, by the way, here are just some numbers. Out of the 7 million folks last year, only 70,000 used TMS. So you'd think, wait a sec, this is an almost perfect solution from an efficacy perspective, but it's, you'd expect it to hit a double-digit percentage of the market. This is the most severe market. People are in pain, etc. And only 1% is actually addressed. So we thought, okay, why not create TMS to go? TMS in a mobile form factor with a 30-minute outpatient procedure that goes above the bone and the inner table of the skull. And for the rest of your life, you have a little TMS machine, in you. And that TMS to go is really TMS for the 99 rest of the percent of this market. That's where we start. But TMS is not just approved for depression. It's also already approved for obsessive compulsive disorder. It's already approved for substance abuse disorder, like nicotine cessation, for example. It's becoming, it's used by the VA for PTSD. It's used for anxiety across the country, off label. So it's kind of positioning itself as this very, very generalizable modern technique that doesn't come with the side effects of electric shock therapy of the past. You used to have side effects like amnesia or cognitive personality changes, things like that with electric shock therapy. TMS doesn't have those side effect profiles, so it's great technique, but really just has a problem with access and compliance. And so we said, okay, let's make TMS to go so that all the indications that can be benefiting from TMS treatment can benefit from us. And bringing it back to your point, TMS is hitting traditionally surface cortical targets. And so you might have a target on the surface of the cortex, a part of a network. And then you might have a deeper structure that it's connected to, okay? And if you're hitting the external point, you can actually neuromodulate the deeper structure. And so you can do this rebalancing of brain networks that Darin mentioned from the outside, less invasively, because you're not interacting with single neurons, you're interacting with, as I mentioned, many neurons. So this is basically the thesis of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going about it a little bit differently.
It makes sense. And I want to dig just a little bit deeper on the concept of TMS to go. And Dr. Dougherty, I want to pass this question on to you. So, one of the concepts that I've read about that could be a potential opportunity here is physicians having the opportunity to essentially remotely send updated prescriptions and algorithms to device, similar to how, like, let's say Tesla rolls out an update to the algorithm and it just goes out to all the cars, right? And obviously this wouldn't roll out to every single patient, but like you can tailor this to patients. Can you talk about how that remote management capability could potentially transform the relationship between patients and psychiatrists?
Yeah, if we achieve our goal, I mean, the whole idea here is to get TMS to go so that a much larger population accesses it that currently can, with the number of TMS machines in the country and the difficulty getting to them. So if we achieve this, docs that do interventional psychiatry like myself are going to have a lot more patients, and they're not going to have to come in. And our device does have the capability to download prescriptions from the cloud. They would be individualized to patients. You'd probably start with the standard protocol to start with, but you can perturb that prescription just like you would medication to try to increase the benefit. Also, the device, we haven't gotten there yet, but this device also senses. So it has stimulating electrodes and recording electrodes. And as we collect enough data, we hope to start to see a correlation between the signals that we're sensing and a relationship with depression improvement, because then we would have a biomarker for what's happening in real time. So we'll also be able to get that data from the device into the cloud to us, and the prescription from us through the cloud to them. This will be extremely important when we have a lot of patients. And I'll finish with another important thing about making this accessible. I think not going through the bone makes it so that if we really do high volume, once you go through the skull, it's neurosurgeons, right? But even a general surgeon could do, open the scalp, bevel a little bit into the skull, place this device and close it up. So it's the minimally invasive component, the intercalvarial, I think is a really important aspect for scalability and accessibility.
I was going to say for the people who are watching on YouTube or on Spotify, let me bring up the device on your website so you guys can see it. For those who are interested, you can go to innercosmos.ai to see what I'm showing here. But here's the device. By the way, I love good design. So, this looks like a really cool Apple product, right? And so here's essentially the device and where it's being placed. So again, like it's right under the skin. It looks like, there's a little bit of an indentation that's made in the skull just so it fits. But that's about it, right?
Exactly. And
yeah,
then
it's
the
inert
patient
until you put the
yeah,
pod on it as well. So
exactly.
you can talk about that, Meron. You know the pod better than I do.
Sure. Yeah.
And something
yeah.
I do want to highlight is, again, like first clinical trial for depression approved by the FDA in 20 years, which is great. So that just kind of tells you how little innovation has been done in this space. I mean, if we think about any other specialty going a couple years without any kind of innovation, it would be kind of like insane. It'd be crazy to hear, but like, yeah, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the space. And I would imagine that like so many things are stemmed, come from depression. Like I would say, like, think about one of the biggest epidemics here in the US, which is diabetes. I bet you can track a statistically significant percentage of diabetic patients back to the fact that they could be depressed. And if you're depressed, like you're not going to be in the mood to not forget about exercise, but even eat healthy, So I feel like there's, the numbers that you guys provided in the millions, it might be even bigger than that, because I think that, if somebody dies of diabetes or a heart condition or something like that, they're not going to go back to the root cause, which could potentially be depression.
Yeah. There's a marked medical comorbidity with depression. Cardiac, diabetes are the big ones. Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you guys, perfect timing, by the way. So a few hours ago, Meron, you posted a really exciting post on LinkedIn. So I'll just read the first line of the post, which is: "Today marks another powerful and promising milestone for psychiatric BCI, the release of Intercosmos's 36 patient month clinical data." So maybe Dr. Dougherty or Meron, I'll let you guys say, but tell us more about that study. What did you guys find, and why is it so important?
I'll pass the mic to Dr. Dougherty. This is in that LinkedIn post that you just referenced. I was simply posting Dr. Dougherty's CMO report of the first 36
and I misspoke,
months.
by the way. So just so people know, it's a 36-month outcomes from their psychiatric neurostimulation study in treatment-resistant depression. So, Dr. Dougherty, tell us a little bit more about it. Like, first of all, like, what was the goal of this study, and
Yeah.
what were the outcomes that you had?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was an IDE approved by the FDA, and it's an early safety and feasibility study, which is how the FDA always starts, right? Before you go into the trials that assess efficacy. However, we of course measured efficacy, even though the FDA is interested in the safety and feasibility. So for the primary endpoints, let's hit those first. It's been safe in all three patients and very feasible to implant and very feasible to deliver the stimulation. So we've hit those goals. In terms of efficacy, we have 3 patients now with a total of 36 months of data. And our news release was really on the 3rd patient. Big picture, every patient that we've implanted had a previous course of TMS, and we know to what degree they responded. Some time passes, they enroll in our clinical trial, we put the device in and deliver TMS-like treatment 7 days a week instead of 5, because there are no weekends with this device, you just do it at home, and collected data. Oh, bless you. And collected data. And every patient had a higher response with the Intercosmos device than they did with their previous TMS trial. It's not doublings, but it's, 5, 10, 15, 20% better. The patient that we reported on recently, so just in brief, our first patient with the Intercosmos device achieved a 41% improvement with their depressive symptoms over the year that they were in the trial. And that was 27% better than their prior TMS improvement. Patient 2 is a really remarkable story. After 17 months of continuous therapy, he has an 83% improvement in his depressive symptoms. He also had been depressed and really having difficulty function for 17 years before he had the Intercosmos device implanted. And that 83% improvement marks 2 things. First, it was a full 60% better than their prior TMS outcome, number 1, which is huge. Number 2, an 83% improvement at baseline took this person from not just being a responder, which in depression clinical trials is a 50% or more improvement in symptoms, but all the way to remission, which means a score in the 0 to 10 range on our psychometric scales that measure depression severity. And remission really means asymptomatic or close to it. So he's been asymptomatic now for over a year in remission. So it's just been a life changer for this gentleman. The focus of our recent press release was the 3rd patient who's been implanted and stimulated now for 7 months. So they're still in the middle of the year. But even at this juncture, he's recorded a 54% reduction in depressive symptoms, which would correspond with treatment response. And that's 21% better than they did with their prior treatment with TMS. So we still have time in working with this patient, adjusting stimulation parameters. A response is a huge deal in treatment-resistant depression. But we're greedy and we'd like to achieve remission with this individual like we did with patient number 2. In terms of downstream, improvements in mood, more motivated, getting out of the house, doing more stuff with family, daily function is improved. And we talk with the patients and families repeatedly, and they've really had markedly sustained improvement with this device.
I'm curious again, like with respecting, of course, HIPAA guidelines, but I'm wondering, what was it like when you spoke to some of the families? Like, how was their reaction about the change?
Yeah, they were remarkable. Patient number 2 is the one in remission, so of course that's the one that's the most astonishing. Dad would come home and go to the basement and watch TV and not spend time upstairs with wife and children. He wasn't mean or anything. He was just isolating. Having trouble with work, kind of on and off with work for 17 years, little interaction with family. Dad is going out and buying board games and sitting upstairs and initiating playing board games with his wife and his young children. This is the kind of, I gave numbers, but in terms of what that means downstream in terms of day-to-day existence, the families are really have been shocked by it.
That's amazing.
We have another patient that has also been kind of isolated. We're talking about people who have been in the basement for, decades, basically,
Right.
and are finally
Not like
coming out to see their
seasonal depression.
families. No, this is not seasonal depression. This is very, very different. So imagine that kind of a person, suddenly, um, some psychiatrists describe it as coming back online and talking to their friends for the first time in years, going on nature hikes, going back to the gym, creating a sustainable life. And so it's just so inspiring to see the impact that this device has on real human, moments. Of course, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't sit there like Darin, listen to these case studies all day long. So when I come across these stories, it's really emotive and grounding and humbling. So yeah, it's a really inspiring line of work, and we're just getting started. I mean, we want to support more and more patients. We want to, as Darin mentioned, achieve more and more remissions, and yeah, that's the target.
That's fantastic. And something I did want to ask a little about, which is going back to patient two. So again, that you showed that that a patient achieved an 83% improvement from baseline and remained in remission range for over a year. How do you guys define or clinically define like the remission range within the context of the study, and like what sort of assessments sort of confirmed that sustained state?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little technical, but it's probably good for the audience to know.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
let's
I'm
go
sure
for it. Right?
we don't have a whole lot of psych episodes, and so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we'll SEO the hell out of this. So we'll get a lot of psychiatrists listening. I already texted one of my friends who's a psychiatrist saying like, "Hey, I just had this company on the show." So yeah, let's like talk technical with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the FDA only accepts two psychometric scales for endpoints, as primary endpoints for depression trials. Those are the Hamilton Depression Scale and the Montgomery and the Montgomery Asberg Depression Scale, or the MADRS. The MADRS is the more modern version. I think they're relatively comparable, but the MADRS is used more frequently now. So that's the scale we're talking about, and it's a scale that goes from 0 up to 60. And the higher the number, the more severe the depression. And so response is a big change in somebody's life if they're depressed, even if they don't go into remission. So let's say you start at 40 and you go down to 18. That would be considered a response because it's a 50% or more improvement, and has a huge impact on the daily life. The ultimate goal, we don't always achieve it, but we're greedy and try to, is remission, which is, depending on the literature, anywhere from 0 to 7 or 0 to 10 on the MADRS scale, which means you're close to 0, and you may be without symptoms or mildly symptomatic. Most of the general population doesn't score a 0 on the MADRS, even if you're not depressed. If you have trouble sleeping or your appetites change, we're all going to score a couple points on the thing. So 0 to 10 is considered remission.
Got it.
Which is really the holy grail of treatment of the illness.
Fantastic. So quick, like we're gonna shift real quick. So Meron, I have a question to ask you. I'm holding here one of my. I don't have, actually, this is the only paid magazine subscription I have, which is to LSI's Lens, the Lens magazine. I love it. It's a great magazine for those who are interested. Yeah, I love it. They do such a great job of highlighting stories in the industry, presenting a lot of their market intel. For those who are interested, like shameless plug, like you should subscribe to this magazine. But in there, one of my favorite areas is their hot takes. So this is just like quotes from the industry. So the very first one is from Balint Varkuti, who's the CEO and co-founder of Surrogate. And the quote is, Elon Musk's Neuralink created unrealistic market valuations larger than the entire established neuromodulation markets combined. I'm wondering if you can, give your 2 cents on that, and what do you think about that quote, and what do you what's your take on the current valuations of some of these BCI companies?
It's a great question. I think Well, first of all, that's a factual quote. That's not a interpretable quote, what you just read. I mean, I think they're raising an $8.5 billion valuation, about $500 million of new money recently. That's Neuralink. Um, and other companies like Synchron and Precision Neuroscience and others are raising at really high valuations as well, and a lot of capital. Um, and I think the ultimate potential of those markets is huge. Not only to serve tetraplegia and paralysis, Neuralink is going after cortical blindness, for example, and other traumatic brain injuries. I think ultimately we could, serve big markets and holy use cases. Like this is really critical work that's being done. Um, and I think, and I'm really glad they're going after it. So that's point one. And point two, it is when we look at depression, for example, as just one example, even the severe depression is like an order of magnitude larger a market than the paralysis markets that these companies are tend to start by going after. And I can tell you, we are not raising at these really high valuations. I I I did that in my last company at Meta. There was this like hot markets, and it was about who can raise the most and grow the company fastest. And I'm very cautious about that now, because what happens is in these and markets where there's a bit of hype is that companies over syndicate. They break little pieces of the pie to as many investors as they can at the highest valuation that they can, and they create not only unrealistic expectations in terms of exit for investors, but also for their own life journey of the company. From round to round, they just have to keep pushing higher and higher. And kind of learning from the field of augmented reality, applying that here, I wanted to take a very different approach and really try to ground it into the mathematics and the basics, so that investors always have upside, and they have ultimately a lot of upside when you get to the market.
I love that. And it's good. It's good for investors too, because the fact of the matter is venture capital underperformed so badly as an asset class over the last few years that venture firms are changing their names to capital or other terms just to indicate that they don't, they're not a venture firm anymore. And I think that I think one of the benefits about MedTech is that it's a pretty steady Eddie industry, and you can have good returns within a short amount of time. But in the BCI space, because of how new it is, how different it is, you can end up with these very large outsized returns, but it also has to be valued correctly. That's
Yeah,
that's the biggest thing.
it's all about that. It's really all about that. It's a feedback loop, right? It's sensing the market, it's adjusting, it's looking about at the potential outcome where if there was actually a Morgan Stanley report that Naveen Rao published about at Forbes, and as a really interesting report about BCI. And the tagline of the report is BCI is a $400 billion company, a $400 billion industry as projected by Morgan Stanley. And if you look at the pie chart of what that $400 billion is made of, essentially three-quarters of the pie chart is depression, and then a quarter of it is about 10 different little slices of everything else. And so that was just a really interesting thing, to look at a $250 billion projection for just depression. So I think people are starting to wake up to how big the opportunity within psychiatric BCI is. Intercosmos is the pioneer of psychiatric BCI. On many levels, chronologically, I think our device is very advanced. And so I think we have a real shot at taking a meaningful piece of that, and I think others do as well. I think there's great other companies out there like Motif and others that are coming in, and this market is so colossal that I think it could have a few really big return on investments. So I think there's especially if you price yourself right. Basically, that's the bottom line. You got to price yourself right. You got to make sure that between now and the exit, there's enough room for you to increase steadily your valuation and not over raise at a hype cycle kind of valuation and need to do a down run in the future. That's the lesson learned that I've had in my previous kind of career.
Well, and, just to kind of wrap things up, and again, thanks for coming on the show. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about like how much have you guys raised to date? What are you currently doing with that money, and what's the next like year look like in terms of like your regulatory and commercial pathway?
Yeah, so we are. I'm trying to think what's public.
That's you gotta be careful with that. Yeah,
we're before the round that we're looking at right now. We had a $12.5-ish million seed round, which is now getting capped up with more. So we'll have some announcements shortly, and so not a small seed round by any measure. But I think when you look at that $250 billion plus market, that's kind of ahead of us. That's a very reasonable thing, and there's more capital and more interest coming into the company every day. So we're super excited, but most importantly is to be able to help these patients that have really had a tough time. I mean, the one patient called his 17 years the roller coaster from hell. This is a direct quote in an interview, and tried every antidepressant. It works for a while, it crashes, and finally they get to TMS, and it works for a slightly longer while, and then it crashes, and they're in the dark, and it's just a really painful disorder. And to see them come to life, come back to life, come back to themselves, come into remission, is just a really, really inspiring thing. And that's ultimately what keeps driving this. I think the finances, the financial picture is huge. When you really look at the mathematics, there's so much upside. But the grounded human experience of going through this with patients is just, it's lovely to see patients improving. And Darin's report from a few hours ago of the first 36 patient months is a huge milestone for the industry of psychiatric BCI. I mean, I should clarify, this is the only clinical trial that's ID approved since vagus nerve stimulation, really 20 years ago, for devices that are implanted for BCI. So, charting ahead here, moving fast to support patients and growing every day. That's what we're working on.
I'm really excited to follow you guys along, especially considering, it's already a very large market, massive problem that needs to be solved. But I think you guys are going to have a much bigger impact than people might be estimating. So I'm really excited to see what's next for you all. And for those who are listening, if you're a psychiatrist, please forward this on to another psychiatrist so they start getting familiar with this term of psychiatric BCI. If you're know an investor or an investor in the space, you can learn more about the company. You can just go to innercosmos.ai or just go connect with the team on LinkedIn. I know Meron is quite active on there, so you can connect with him directly there. So as always, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're a psychiatrist, go ahead and subscribe to our show. We're going to definitely do more of these. And give us 5 stars. And as always, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.